So, I could throw a lot more data at you, but I thought instead it might be helpful if we walked through a thought experiment together. So imagine that you're not here in a comfortable Singaporean conference room right now, but instead you're in a town, someplace in a country where a lot of people live on very little. Imagine that you're the mayor of this town, the leader of this community. Your people mostly don't have electricity. If they do, it's in the form of a 12-volt car battery and a couple of wires. The kids can't study at night. Now, you're an enterprising mayor, so you've applied for and won a grant. It might be a grant from a philanthropic institution, or perhaps it's part of a larger grant that came to your country from the government of a wealthier country. Now, you could use it maybe to buy a diesel generator and get some rudimentary electrical power to your people, but that's dirty, it's expensive, and now you are exposing your people to fuel risk. So you think back, a couple years back, about this company that came to your town and almost invested. They walked away because it was slightly too expensive to connect to the grid from your town. So you call this company back and you talk to them, and they run the numbers again with your grant. And guess what? It's a viable business for them with the grant mixed in. And your people could get reliable, clean power. Now, all of this flies in the face of normal aid. Putting charitable money and commercial money into the same pot and giving it to a company, it makes people really nervous. So guess what? It actually happens all the time. It's called, if it's done right, it's win-win, and it's called blended finance. Now, blended finance is the use of funding, catalytic funding, from either a public or a philanthropic source to increase private investment in sustainable development. Now, let me talk a little bit about where you see it. At Convergence, we've recorded over 750 individual transactions that have closed in the market. And all told, they represent over $170 billion of business done. The transactions most frequently happen in sub-Saharan Africa, about half of all of the deals. Next most frequent destination for blended finance is Latin America at 20% of the deals. The sectors most frequently targeted by blended finance are energy, which is basically renewables, at about 30%, financial services at about 25%, and agriculture at 15%. Now, looking at the sectors brings up a really important point. The reason these sectors, and not health and education, show up so frequently in our statistics is because for blended finance to work, there has to be an ability to generate revenues. In other words, the initiative has to make some money. It doesn't have to be a lot. After all, the principle behind blended finance is to bend the economics disproportionately toward the party that needs to make a commercial return. But some money has to flow from the concept. Likewise, while blended finance can create a cash stream and make a transaction less risky, it can't cover for a business model that fundamentally fails to capture economic value and to monetize it. If a project is small, risky, unstructured, and unlikely to make a profit, then a straight grant is probably what you're looking at. In the same vein, blended finance deals tend to show up more frequently in lower middle income countries, about 55% of the deals we've seen, and much less frequently, about 26% of the time, in the least developed economies. And that makes sense because, again, you have to have underlying revenues. And if you take a small amount of catalytic money, you can create an investable opportunity in a higher income country much more readily. And that leaves grant resources to be used in a more pure form in least developed economies. So let's talk about who does blended finance. On the catalytic side, it's most frequently the aid agency of a wealthy nation. And sometimes it's philanthropic institutions. And on the commercial side, it's most frequently development banks, commercial banks, some impact investors, and institutional investors. And by combining their resources, and I don't mean just capital, but I mean different experiences and knowledge sets, each of the parties can get what they wanted, whether that is returns, impact, or some combination of the two. And that's what makes blended finance a unique tool for development. We also know that there are definite patterns, arrangements, and structures that have worked over and over again that we can learn from and reapply. So for a party that's coming into blended finance for the first time, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, I use the example of a mayor and a single company getting together and getting something done. Most of the time, blended finance operates at a much larger scale. Picture a private equity fund that raises $500 million in investment capital and joins forces with a development partner. And they blend that money once in the fund, and over the course of, say, 5 years, go out and invest in a series of separate transactions. That's called aggregation, and it's really important for taking blended finance from one by one by one to moving major amounts of money into development challenges. So let's talk about climate. We're here today to talk about climate. We've heard about the huge amount of resources it's going to need to get us to where we're trying to go, to decarbonize developed markets and to set developing markets onto a resilient and low carbon path. And as the minister from Egypt said, public budgets are woefully short of money for this challenge. But the private sector operates on the right scale. It operates in the trillions. The issue is that bending the arc of private sector investment into the countries that need it most is really tough. We're talking about fiduciaries. Their job, their duty, is to invest your money in the safest possible way for the highest possible returns for the least amount of risk. Blended finance gives them a way to do that. Now, why make life easier for the private sector investor? Let's go back to that town where you're still mayor. If you had gone it alone, you would have ended up with some subpar solution that it would have given some electricity to your townspeople, but not really a future. Going hand in hand with that profit-seeking firm, you've got the lights turned on in a much more reliable way. You also brought an employer to your town. You may actually have stimulated interest in your town among future investors. Your own people have an opportunity to pursue their own livelihoods. You've primed the pump of an economy. As mayor, though, you have a problem. What's that problem? What do you tell that philanthropic firm or that aid agency when they ask you what you did with the money? You're going to say, good news, we wrote a check to ABC Corporation and they're in control now. Well, yes, that is what you're going to say, but this is where impact and impact metrics have to kick in. The catalytic money shouldn't be asking, oh goodness, is somebody going to get rich? They should be asking, is this the best value for my money? Would that transaction have happened without my money? Can we maybe count the amount of carbon we didn't put into the atmosphere when we set aside that idea for the diesel generator? That's the kind of question we should be asking from the catalytic side. That's its return on investment, if you want to think about it that way. Now, if you're listening to me today and you're a private investor, I invite you to consider blended finance as a means to open up new opportunities and new markets. Maybe you're considering placing capital in a place or in a sector or in a business model that would have large positive impacts for humans and the planet. If that investment has those attributes, you might invite in a partner for whom those assets or those attributes are what they're seeking. And if you are listening to me today and you manage grant resources or something like them, maybe you're the aid official in that far-off wealthy country, or maybe you're the local philanthropist, I invite you to consider not going it alone, but to use your money as a fire starter to ignite private sector investment into objectives that dwarf your own resources. If we're going to move major money into the net zero objective, into climate investing, blended finance is one way to do it. It's going to take all of us going out and thinking radically and acting boldly to overcome the sense that this cannot be done. Folks, we're headed right toward and past the moment of 1.5 degrees Celsius climate change. And we are nowhere near the trillions that we need to stay on the right side of that number. Blended finance isn't a silver bullet, but it's a tool. And it's time we all got together and started using it. Thank you.